Hi, this is Dr. Winbush with Sankofa Healing Arts and Functional Medicine. And in this video, which I plan to make quite short, I want to just briefly talk about some of the common hormone shifts that people experience during perimenopause and then moving into the menopausal transition. So, changes ahead, and what we think of often in terms of the hormonal symphony that occurs in people who are menstruating with a lot of regularity. And saying that, it's clear to me that there are a subset of people who, during even their reproductive years, do not necessarily experience regular cycles. They are maybe some degree of PCOS or other hormone imbalances that can lead to irregular cycles, even during those reproductive years. But in general, what we think about is a very sort of cyclical, regular variation in hormones that allows for that menstrual cycle to occur on average every 28 to 30 days. And so that's a picture representation of it. When we start to get specific, what we see, and hopefully you can follow along here with this diagram, is that before menopause, and this is just representing kind of two of the major sex hormones that we think about, progesterone and estrogen, we see that there is this very rhythmic rise and fall each month of estrogen and progesterone. And this is an oversimplification of what it looks like, but in the big scheme of things, that's what we see. And then during this perimenopausal period, which on average happens sometime during the mid to late 40s, but can often start to occur due to stress, due to genetics, even earlier than that, the first thing that we'll notice are, if we do lab testing often, and then just based on the symptoms that people experience, is a decrease and irregularity in the progesterone levels. And then what starts to happen is that there becomes more irregularity or erraticness to what's happening with estrogen. And estrogen here is in red. And then as people get closer to menopause, and once again, menopause is defined as going 1 year without a menstrual cycle. So as people are nearing that menopause transition into postmenopause, the estrogen levels, instead of being erratic, will start to fall. But if you'll notice, because blue is the color for progesterone, by that time, the progesterone levels are often very, very low. And then in postmenopause, you'll see generally that progesterone levels as well as estrogen levels remain quite low. And so, what does that translate into in terms of what we're seeing clinically and in terms of symptoms? So, with decreased progesterone, you'll start to notice that maybe some changes in the menstrual cycle. And those changes can go in either direction, that the cycles can become shorter and maybe sometimes lighter. They can also become heavier, and there can be more bleeding, especially if that person already had a degree of what's known as estrogen dominance, that they were producing more estrogen or having more difficulty getting rid of the estrogen that they produced, or exposed to other substances in the environment that look like estrogen. Then as progesterone falls away, and progesterone's big role is to kind of balance estrogen, then you'll start to see more of these sort of estrogen dominant symptoms. So in that case, the changes in the menstrual cycle will be towards heavier periods, longer periods. Progesterone also has a very balancing effect on our nervous system. And so this can also be the time when anxiety, mood symptoms, depression, and sleep disruption can start to present. And that can sometimes actually be one of the first symptoms that people experience during the perimenopausal transition, especially if people have maybe dealt with mood issues even prior to going through perimenopause. And then as the levels of estrogen start to fluctuate and become more erratic, there are additional, sometimes more marked changes to the menstrual cycle if people had not already been experiencing them. Again, if the estrogen levels tend to fluctuate quite a bit, you might start to see migraine headaches, especially in people who maybe already were migraine headache sufferers, or even if people have not had migraines up to that point. Sometimes that rapid fluctuation in estrogen levels can result in migraine headaches. This is when you'll start to see vasomotor symptoms, which once again are things like hot flashes, night sweats, and potentially breast tenderness. Breast swelling can be seen with these fluctuating estrogen levels. And again, this is not every potential symptom, but just some of the common symptoms. And then as those estrogen levels begin to fall, the cycles will often become more irregular. You may actually start to see the complete cessation of cycles or missing cycles. This is when you would start to develop maybe more vasomotor symptoms, more hot flashes, more frequent night sweats, and also GUSM, which stands for genital urinary syndrome of menopause, which could be some of those vaginal symptoms, discomfort with sex, dryness, atrophy. So those are some of the common patterns of hormonal shifts and some of the symptoms associated with them. Again, in a very limited way, what are some of the things that we can do to address these? Well, as progesterone levels start to fall, and again, these are natural shifts that are happening. I don't want to characterize this as a disease state, but there can be lifestyle and herbal supports that can be helpful. A nutritional supplement called Chase Tree or Vitex can often be helpful to help support progesterone levels a little bit more. Stress reduction is throughout all of this extremely important for many different reasons. It's important because of the impacts that it has on other hormonal systems like our thyroid and like our cortisol system, because irregularities and imbalances in thyroid and blood sugar certainly can worsen the symptoms of perimenopause. Stress reduction is also important because the common root hormone that's used to make things like cortisol is also used to make progesterone. So we want to make sure that we are not causing imbalance and causing more cortisol to be made so that our body can do its best, even as we're moving towards perimenopause, to continue to produce some progesterone. Uh, Adaptogens, which are herbal supports that have a balancing effect on the stress response system and the cortisol system, can also be helpful. Those are things like ashwagandha, rhodiola, shishandra, just to name a few. At some point, some people will benefit from progesterone supplementation. Oral forms of progesterone, especially, can be very helpful for sleep disruption in many people. And then as the estrogen levels begin to fluctuate, again, progesterone support can be helpful. It can also be helpful, especially if people are having spikes in those estrogen levels or estrogen symptoms, to provide support for the liver and the digestive health to ensure that there is good elimination of those estrogens as they are no longer needed during the monthly cycles. And that can take the form of things like N-acetylcysteine, flax seeds, magnesium, B vitamins, and obviously food-based sources that are good sources for those minerals and those vitamins. And then as the estrogen levels do fall, as someone is in menopause, then explicitly estrogen therapy, hormone replacement therapy with estrogen can be helpful. So hopefully that gives just a little bit of an overview of what some of the common hormonal shifts are, what types of symptoms result from those shifts, and what are some of the ways that we can help support and to address those.